When we talk about male sexual desire, we tend to fall into caricatures, flat, unexamined assumptions that men are always ready, always wanting, always driven by an instinctual, almost mechanical urge. This portrayal, while pervasive, is not only misleading, it's deeply dehumanizing. It reduces a complex psychological and emotional experience to something purely biological, almost animalistic. When you strip away the depth of a person's inner life like that, what you're left with is confusion, shame, and silence. Men are often caught between what they feel internally and what they're told they're supposed to feel. The result is a chronic sense of alienation, not only from others, but from themselves. Now, there's some truth in the biological dimension. Testosterone, for instance, is linked to libido. Evolutionary psychology also has something to say about the reproductive strategies that shaped human behavior over millennia. But if we stop the conversation there, we miss the most critical part. Human beings, including men, are not just bundles of instincts. We're conscious creatures, thinking, feeling, reflecting beings. Sexual desire, particularly in the context of men, cannot be meaningfully discussed without reference to the psyche, to personal history, to values, and to social context. Here's the real issue. Men are rarely given the space or the language to articulate what sexual desire actually means to them. Many grow up in environments where vulnerability is punished, where emotional expression is seen as weakness. Over time, this leads to a fragmentation of the self. A man may feel desire, yes, but he may also feel guilt about it, confusion, or even fear. He may crave intimacy more than stimulation, but because he lacks the tools to express that, it comes out sideways through withdrawal, frustration, or compulsive behavior. And then we wonder why relationships break down or why so many men feel lost. There's also a philosophical element to this that we tend to ignore. Desire fundamentally is about the pursuit of something transcendent. It's a reaching out, a longing for connection, meaning, even wholeness. When male desire is flattened into a mere physical impulse, it becomes disconnected from that higher purpose. And when that happens, it not only diminishes the man, it diminishes the relationship, the partner, the human experience as a whole. We need to move past the cliche that men only want one thing. That idea is not just false, it's destructive. It shames men into silence, makes women suspicious or dismissive, and sets both up for disappointment and misunderstanding. If we are serious about improving relationships, romantic, sexual, or otherwise, we must be willing to confront the truth that male sexual desire is not a one-dimensional drive, but a complex, often vulnerable expression of the human need to connect, to be seen, to be valued. The truth is, when we allow men to tell the full story of their desire, we're not just listening to them, we're learning how to be more human ourselves. It's tempting to think of male sexual desire as something purely biological, almost like a reflex triggered by hormones or visual stimuli. And there's no denying that biology plays a role. Testosterone levels, for instance, are correlated with libido. Visual arousal patterns in men have been studied extensively, and evolutionary psychology offers models that explain male mating strategies in terms of reproductive efficiency. These frameworks aren't wrong, but they're incomplete. If we rely solely on them, we risk reducing human behavior to mere mechanics. That kind of reductionism might make things easier to categorize, but it leaves out what matters most: the human soul, the conscious mind, and the social context in which desire unfolds. Here's the deeper truth. Biology is the foundation, but not the architecture. Think of it this way. Testosterone may provide the fuel, but it doesn't determine the direction. Human beings are not governed by instincts alone. We are meaning-making creatures. Our desires, including sexual ones, are shaped and filtered by personal history, moral values, cultural narratives, and the emotional quality of our relationships. If a man has unresolved trauma, or if he has internalized shame around intimacy, or if he's caught in a dysfunctional relationship dynamic, all of that will influence how, when, and why he experiences sexual desire. Biology doesn't override those realities. It interacts with them. This interaction between biology and experience is critical. A man could have healthy hormone levels and still feel sexually disconnected or numb. Why? Because desire is not just about physical readiness. It's about psychological openness. It's about trust, safety, connection. It's about how a man sees himself and how he believes he is seen by others. If those beliefs are fractured, if he feels inadequate or invisible or chronically misunderstood, then his capacity to feel and express desire will suffer, regardless of what his physiology might suggest. This is especially true in long-term relationships. The initial spark that biology may help ignite doesn't automatically sustain itself. That requires emotional intimacy, mutual respect, a sense of shared meaning. When those are lacking, sexual desire doesn't just diminish, it becomes fraught with tension. It either withdraws or becomes compulsive, and neither of those outcomes serves the individual or the relationship. When people say he's just a guy, it's hormones. They're not just simplifying, they're distorting. They're ignoring the fact that men are constantly navigating between instinct and intention, between biological impulse and the need for emotional resonance. That's not a weakness, it's a profoundly human challenge. And it's one that deserves empathy, not mockery, curiosity, not dismissal. To understand male sexual desire, we must see men as whole beings. Biological, yes, but also psychological, relational, and moral. Only then can we begin to create the kind of conversations and relationships that honor the complexity of human desire. One of the most persistent and misleading myths about male sexuality is the idea that male desire is constant, automatic, and always accessible, that men by default are always ready, always wanting, and always able to act on sexual impulse. This belief, repeated often enough in media, relationships, and even casual conversation, becomes internalized. It forms a silent standard by which many men measure themselves and, more often than not, fall short. The result is a pervasive sense of confusion, inadequacy, and quiet shame, because the truth is far more nuanced. Male sexual desire is not inexhaustible. It is vulnerable, profoundly so. Desire in men, like in all human beings, is subject to change. It fluctuates with psychological state, emotional environment, physical health, and relationship quality. Men are not machines. They are sentient beings with complex inner worlds. Stress, for instance, can profoundly suppress male libido. So can anxiety, depression, burnout, or emotional disconnection. When a man's nervous system is overwhelmed, when his psyche is burdened by unresolved pain or daily existential pressures, his body may not respond the way culture tells him it should. And when it doesn't, many men don't speak up about it. They retreat into silence, or worse, into self-contempt. They believe something is wrong with them, not because there is, but because they've been taught it's not supposed to happen. And here's where the psychological damage deepens. When men experience a decrease in sexual desire, they're not just dealing with the absence of a biological urge, they're confronting what they perceive to be a failure of identity. Masculinity in many modern frameworks is still deeply linked to sexual performance and pursuit. So when that drive diminishes, it can feel like a threat to their very sense of self. This is not a superficial insecurity, it's existential, and it needs to be treated with the seriousness it deserves. What complicates this even further is that most men are not encouraged to articulate the emotional roots of their desire, much less its absence. Vulnerability in this domain is often dismissed or pathologized. But if we understand male desire as a barometer of psychological well-being, as a reflection of both inner life and external relationships, then we begin to see its fluctuations not as signs of deficiency, signals that something deeper may need to be addressed. Perhaps it's a lack of emotional connection in the relationship. Perhaps it's unresolved grief. Perhaps it's exhaustion from the pressures of being everything to everyone. Provider, protector, stoic. Whatever the cause, the solution is not silence. It's not shame. It's not pretending that desire should be a constant or else it's broken. The solution is to listen to what the psyche is trying to express through the body, to move beyond the myth of invulnerability and recognize that even male desire, often idealized as primal and indomitable, is in fact exquisitely human. Strength isn't the absence of weakness, it's the courage to confront vulnerability and stay present anyway. Cultural narratives are powerful. They shape not only how we see the world, but how we see ourselves. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the realm of male sexuality. From a very early age, boys are exposed to messages, some overt, some subtle, that tell them what it means to be a man. And central to that message is the idea that a man's sexual desire should be constant, assertive, even aggressive. He should always want sex, always initiate, always perform. This script is not just simplistic, it's tyrannical. It creates expectations that no real person can consistently meet, and it punishes deviation with shame and confusion. The media reinforces this narrative relentlessly in movies, television, advertising, even comedy. The sexually voracious man is either a hero or a joke, but never a human being. His desire is rarely portrayed as emotionally nuanced, rarely dependent on context, rarely tied to vulnerability or connection. And so, over time, the cultural image of male desire becomes flat, mechanical, even predatory. It's not something that can ebb or flow or be discussed in depth. It just is, or it's broken. This framing is not just damaging to men, it's corrosive to relationships. It teaches women to expect a kind of robotic consistency in their partners, to equate sexual withdrawal with rejection or disinterest, and to assume that any disruption in the pattern is a sign of failure. And for men, it creates an impossible standard, because when their experience doesn't match the cultural narrative, they often don't have the language or the permission to explain it. Instead of saying, "I'm feeling disconnected," or "I'm struggling emotionally," many men say nothing at all. Or they force themselves into patterns of behavior that are performative, not authentic, driven by obligation or insecurity rather than genuine desire. At its core, this is a philosophical problem. We've taken something deeply human, desire, and handed it over to ideology and entertainment. We've made it a symbol of power, performance, and status, rather than understanding it as a mode of connection, a form of communication, a mirror of the inner self. And when desire becomes about proving something, about being enough, being man enough, it ceases to be desire in any meaningful sense. It becomes compulsion, or duty, or worse, self-erasure. The way forward isn't to reject male desire, nor to pathologize it, but to reframe it, to see it not as a constant demand, but as a living, dynamic force shaped by emotion, context, and relationship. That means challenging the cultural scripts, questioning them openly, even when it's uncomfortable. It means allowing space for honesty in how men speak about their experiences and how they are heard when they do. If we want authentic intimacy, we have to dismantle the myths that stand in its way. And few myths are more stubborn or more damaging than the one that says, real men always want sex. Real men want connection. Sometimes that means sex, sometimes it means silence, but it always means truth. One of the most overlooked truths about male sexual desire is that it's deeply tied to emotional intimacy. And this is not simply a matter of preference, it's psychological architecture. For many men, especially in long-term relationships, sexual desire is not merely a physical urge, it's an expression of emotional connection, of feeling seen, respected, and wanted. It's the convergence of affection and attraction, an embodied affirmation of love and worth. And yet, because our cultural language around male sexuality is so shallow, this truth often goes unspoken. What's tragic is that we've built a society where men are often emotionally starved but sexually expected. They are told to be strong, to not show vulnerability, to suppress their needs for comfort, tenderness, or reassurance, and then are simultaneously expected to maintain a steady stream of sexual interest. It's a contradiction, and it breaks down over time. When a man is emotionally shut down or feels disconnected from his partner, his desire doesn't simply march on it withdraws, or it misfires, or it becomes compulsive and distorted, seeking affirmation in shallow substitutes, because the deeper need for connection has been denied or dismissed. This is not to say that all male desire is rooted in emotion in the same way, but what we do know, psychologically, is that emotional safety and relational harmony are major contributors to sustained sexual desire in men, especially when trust is required. If a man feels criticized, belittled, unseen, or emotionally neglected, That pain doesn't vanish, it settles, it grows heavy, and often the first place that weight reveals itself is in a decline in desire. Not out of punishment, but because desire cannot thrive in an environment of emotional dissonance. Part of the reason this insight is so difficult to talk about is because emotional intimacy is hard to define. It's not just about long conversations or physical closeness. It's about attunement. It's about whether a man feels that his inner world matters to the person he loves, whether his struggles are met with empathy rather than solutions, whether he feels that his needs are not only heard but honored. When that kind of intimacy exists, sexual desire becomes more than biological. It becomes spiritual. It becomes the deepest form of expression, a reaching out not just for pleasure but for unity. And here's where it becomes philosophically profound. In a meaningful relationship, sex is not a transaction. It's not just about what you get or even what you give. It's about mutual recognition. It's about standing before another person and being fully present, body and soul. That requires trust. That requires safety. And that requires emotional intimacy, something that must be cultivated with intention, not assumed by default. If we want to understand the truth about male sexual desire, we must stop asking only what men want and start asking what makes them feel wanted. Because when a man feels emotionally valued, sexual desire doesn't need to be forced. It flows because it belongs. If there's one thing that becomes clear through all of this, it's that honest conversation, open, respectful, and unflinching, is not optional. It's essential. The truth about male sexual desire isn't just locked inside the male psyche, it's locked inside the silence we've built around it. Too many men have learned to keep their experiences to themselves, either because they don't know how to articulate them, or because when they've tried, they've been dismissed, mocked, or misunderstood. And too many relationships suffer because that silence hardens into distance. We cannot fix what we cannot name, and we cannot name what we are too afraid to hear. This is why empathy, the ability to listen without instantly judging or correcting, is not a soft virtue. It's a structural necessity. Without it, the inner life of the other remains inaccessible, and where that inner life is ignored, intimacy cannot flourish. It withers. Now, this isn't just about men finding the courage to speak. It's also about creating environments where they're actually heard when they do. That means asking different questions, not what's wrong with you or why don't you want sex like you used to, but instead, how are you feeling? What do you need? What's been weighing on you? Because when you shift the focus from performance to experience, you give a man space to show up as a person, not a role. It's worth noting that this requires maturity on both sides. Honest dialogue is not easy. It's uncomfortable. It forces people to confront assumptions, to let go of defensive habits, and to risk vulnerability. But the reward is clarity. You begin to see each other more fully, not just through the lens of unmet needs or misfired expectations, but as complex, evolving human beings. And that clarity, earned through discomfort, is the foundation of genuine connection. Philosophically speaking, desire is relational. It arises not merely from within the self, but in the space between two people. And that space must be nurtured. It must be protected from cynicism, from laziness, from the easy path of pretending everything is fine. Because pretending has a cost. It deadens the relationship. It kills curiosity. And once curiosity is gone, desire doesn't stand much of a chance. So, if you're in a relationship and things feel off, if desire has faded or become tense or confusing, the first and most radical act might be the simplest: talk. But talk with the intent to understand, not to fix. Speak not just to express, but to reveal. And listen not to defend your position, but to learn what it's like to live in the other's skin. In the end, the truth about male sexual desire is not a riddle to be solved. It's a reality to be understood. And the only way we understand it is by having the courage to face it together, with open minds, honest hearts, and a commitment to grow beyond the scripts we've inherited. Real connection begins where pretense ends.